Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about one of the most difficult aspects of being an artist, and that is how to price your artwork. Before we get into that topic, I do have a quick announcement. Stay tuned to hear how you could win a free copy of my new workbook, 30 Days to Find Your Art Style. Now let's get into the video. Setting the right price for your artwork is super important. It helps you determine the value of your artwork and also ultimately helps you earn a living as an artist. In this video, I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to go about pricing your artwork. I'm also going to give some examples. Now, these examples are just guidelines, and I really do encourage you to go about pricing your artwork based on the tips that I give you rather than the examples that I give you. But I know how important it is to have exact examples because when you're new to this, finding these numbers are really difficult, and I understand that, so feel free to use these numbers if you choose to. Also, at the end, I've got a really handy pricing calculator that I've come up with, so do feel free to stick around for that. It'll be really useful for you. Tip number 1, consider your expenses. The first thing you need to do is to figure out how much it actually costs you to make your artwork. For this, you're going to factor in the price of materials as well as any expenses that you might have associated with making your artwork. Expenses might include, do you rent a studio or do you need to commute to that studio in order to make your artwork? For the material side of things, think about how much you use during the process of creating your artwork. If, for example, it costs you $10 for a tube for acrylic paint, and you use half of that tube during the process, you could charge $5. Obviously it'll add up, and if you say use 10 different tubes, each of which you're using half of, the tubes themselves in total would be about $100, but if you've used half, then you can charge $50 as a part of your material cost. As for other expenses, you could include a studio space in this. Perhaps you rent a studio at $500 a month. That might be expensive, I don't know, I don't rent a studio. But let's say, for example's sake, it costs you $500 to rent for a month, and it takes you 1 week to create your artwork, in which case you can charge a week's worth of rent as a part of your final price. So do make a note of all of these numbers as you go, and keep them in mind for the handy calculator that I've got at the end of the video. Tip number 2, research the market. So the second tip is to kind of research the market that you fall into. Get a sense of what other artists in your niche or in your style charge for their artwork. Look at galleries, online marketplaces like Etsy, and other sources that you might have to see what prices people charge for their artwork. You probably want to look at artwork that is similar to yours, whether that's medium or subject or size or experience of the artist, for example. This research will help you to kind of not price yourself out of the market, whereas you're making yourself so expensive that, people might not want to invest in that. But the key thing is not underselling your artwork. I think far more people undersell their work than those people who outprice themselves. Doing research like this will actually help you kind of come up with an idea for an hourly rate as well. For example, you might see someone that creates artwork in the same kind of vein that you do and charges $400 for their artwork. You might look at that and go, well, I know I could create something similar in my style and it would take me about 10 hours. In which case you would take that $400 minus the expected cost of materials. You can kind of loosely judge here, I'm going to just say $50, and then you take the remainder, which is $350, and divide that by the time that it takes you to create that artwork, in which case we'd work out to about $35 per hour. Now this is just an idea, obviously you're welcome to charge what you feel you deserve, but it's just a kind of general idea on how you can kind of work out your hourly rate based on other people's prices. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, I want to thank you so much for sticking through it. It really does mean a lot. Drop the sentence, "My art has value," in the comment box, and by the time I release my next video, I'll be selecting one person to win a free copy of my 30 Days to Find Your Art Style workbook. Now, tip number 3 is to consider your experience and reputation. The third tip is to kind of consider your experience and your reputation as an artist in the world that we live in. If you're just starting out, you may find it helpful to kind of reduce your prices slightly in order to attract more buyers. As you gain experience or build a reputation, you can increase those prices. Early on, it may be tricky to charge thousands for your artwork, but that doesn't mean that you won't be able to charge that much for your artwork eventually. The important thing is, though, is to really not undersell yourself. And as a bare minimum, you at least want to be charging the material costs plus your expenses. Your time has value, and I think you should always charge for that. But I understand, especially when you're starting out, that it may be difficult to really justify to yourself those prices. I I do suggest never going below minimum wage though. And as an important aspect of the hourly rate thing is that as your experience and your reputation grows, you may actually find that you get quicker at creating artwork. When you're first starting out, you may find that actually it takes you longer to create something because your expertise and your skills haven't really been refined yet. I wouldn't necessarily think that means because it takes you longer, you should charge more for that. This is going to sound wild, but actually, if you can create the same thing in less time, that can actually be deemed more valuable. So even though you might get quicker, you can also charge more because your hourly rate will therefore go up. Or you could increase the value based on the fact that your skills are so refined. So it is kind of tricky and convoluted, but my suggestion is always stick to at least a minimum wage. That will depend on where you live, obviously, so do that kind of research as well as part of this. But be aware that as your skills get better, even if that will affect your speed, you can still charge more even if it takes you less time to make something. Probably sounds really confusing, but hopefully it makes sense. So here it is, my handy pricing calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the price of your materials. For this equation, we're going to write the letter M. Then you're going to want to add it to your hourly rate multiplied by the time it took you to create that artwork. For this, we've got H for hourly rate and T for time. If you've sold this piece online and you want to be shipping it to someone, you're going to need to include the postage cost as well. This can obviously be an additional, depending on whether you actually need to post it anywhere, and you'll also want to factor in your packaging material. For this, we'll call that P in the equation. As a sidebar, if you are shipping your artwork anywhere, I massively encourage going for a tracked service or an insured service. This protects you as the artist, and it also protects the buyer as well. If something was to happen in transit, for example, and the artwork was damaged or destroyed, if it's insured, then at least you'll get a payout to cover that loss. So here's an example using that calculator. Let's say you spent $50 on materials, and then the shipping of that artwork is going to cost you $20 plus $5 in packing material like bubble wrap. Let's say it took you 15 hours to complete that artwork, and your hourly rate is $25 an hour. That would make it 50 plus 20 plus 5 brackets 25 times 15. When you've done the maths, that's $450. Obviously a key factor here is the hourly rate, which I put at $25. You can replace that number with something more appropriate. For example, minimum wage if you're just starting out. And ultimately, this is going to sound really crazy, but you can kind of add on numbers depending on, the value that you think your artwork should have and therefore deserves. Even though, say, it might only take 10 hours to create this painting and you've got an hourly rate of $25, you might think that charging $250 for that is justifiable. It might be, especially in the early days, but something you need to bear in mind is that the skill set you have has taken you a long time to get to that point, and you can kind of add value based on the skills that you have and the time it's taken you to learn it. If you've been an artist for years and years and years, that should affect your pricing. The skills that you've amassed should affect your pricing. When people buy your artwork, they're paying not just for the piece that they have in front of them, but for the years of dedication and learning and skill building that you have gone through. So like I said, this is a really rough guideline on starting off pricing your artwork. I don't want you to be afraid to charge what you're worth. And when people come to you and want to buy your artwork, they're investing in the years of dedication that you've put into it. So charge for that. So there you have it, 3 tips on how to go about pricing your artwork. Getting to grips with this and being really confident with those numbers will be a massive help for you as well. Also, don't feel like you have to waver. Just because someone can't afford your prices doesn't mean that your artwork isn't worth that. But with a little bit of research and careful consideration, you can arrive at a fair and reasonable price for your artwork. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. It would really mean a lot to me if you considered subscribing to my channel. Your support is really what keeps me going. Every like, every comment, every share, every single subscriber gives me a massive boost. Do feel free to check out the links in the description. If you fancy getting yourself a copy of my new workbook, 30 Days to Find Your Art Style, I'll leave that in the description below for you. Also, if you fancy shopping Ohuhu, Arteza or Amazon, I've got my affiliate links in the description below as well. As always, much love guys, and I can't wait to see you for my next video. Bye guys.